So how did you go through that education process with the CTOs? Tell us a little bit more about the journey and more about the resistance you had and how you had to navigate that to get those policies into some concrete actual work done.
Well, the big one of the big changes that also happened with this administration that just left was that a lot of the CTOs that were appointed in the different ministries that were not actually technological people. So it was very easy for vendors and private companies to come and sell to them, and half the time they didn't even know what was under the hood. And so there was a very big reform where actually before appointing a CTO, and that has just actually become part of the legislation last week, because this new administration that just started with Claudia Sheinbaum, they're actually creating the National Agency for Technology. No, and they're taking a lot of that work that we did in the past government term, and they're now restructuring it into something a little bit more functional. But now it's law that this agency has to approve who the CTO is going to be in order to ensure that they have the tech capacity. In the previous administration, they had to give the okay before they were on the post. And then this meant that at least we knew that there was people that knew about technology. So with that kind of profile, then it was easier to educate the decision makers. No? So they would be the ones talking to the administration people, to the final user, to a lot of the ministers, and being able to talk about this. No? When that wasn't enough, the presidential office would step in, and they were the ones that would provide kind of like the technological advice and reconforting that these were good solutions. And then a lot of the time it was my position as CEO of this agency, especially to the agencies that were consuming our services, to be doing this kind of like work of reassurance and showing them the vulnerability analysis. So we tried to be very open about those kind of things because there was nothing to hide. And it was a little bit better to show them, okay, like, so we've done the whole process. You agreed that this platform does what you needed to do now. And we just did the vulnerability process, and this is what came out. And these are the results, and there's nothing that you need to be worried about, because if anything was critical, we fixed it. So there was a lot about communicating and being open with these decision makers. Where I found the worst resistance wasn't at that top level management, but it was at the lower level. And this lower level, it was generally the fact that they had been working with the previous technology for many years. Maybe they had a personal relationship with the company that was there. So it was more of like this resistance to change than it a lot of the times wasn't very logical. And they were the ones that would create fear for them, the higher levels, to be able to actually enable the decision. And that's when this relationship from the C level to them was very important. So they actually would buckle up and take the risk. And in the situations where they did, everything worked out really, really well.
Yeah, change often has to be instigated from the top like that, or from the very bottom, right? Did you end up having folks that were in the developer class who were trying to push their management to say, "Hey, look at this thing. Look how well it could work in our situation"?
Well, I think Mexico is very hierarchical still. So for a low-level developer or a leader, sometimes to talk to the CTO or the director is very, very hard sometimes. I did see it in my team. I had an open door policy, and it was very like whoever wanted to talk to me on the hall or walk into my office could. And there were a lot of times where developers would come up to me and say like, "Hey, I know that you asked for this way, but we think there's another way to do it." You know, and that was good because then they were showing initiative, and that's how we actually started also identifying the people that were actually the ones that were going to help us promote these kind of things and grow those into leaders. And we did get like the odd one out in the agencies that they were kind of like the ones that would approach and say like, "Hey, like we want to do this project, but we know that if we take it, it won't happen. So we kind of like want to piggyback from you, and if you can talk to the boss." then it'll be easier for us to like maybe get it on the books. And so it was it was a long time of projects, so there was a lot of situations, but it wasn't that common, and that's the sad part about it, because I am aware that there's some talent out there that is incredible, and you see these guys sometimes what they do on like side work, or what the stuff that they do with communities. There's a lot of talent, and we should be using that in a better way. But then our government structure is very big, so being able to identify these folks, it's very complicated.
When you were talking about the lower level management, and they are kind of trying to refuse to use open source, was there any common misconception that they had, any common fears, or was it just the feeling of not being in control of things anymore?
I think the common fear was it actually going to work, and um, and I think that happens with any technology. And that was a lot of time what the message I would put across. Not like we all know that like there's a famous GRP company that charges you a lot of money, and they're one of the most failed implementations in the world. And they take 6 years implementing something, and it still doesn't work. So I would use a lot of those examples of saying like, hey, these guys have been implementing something for 6 years, it still doesn't work, and um, and it doesn't work because it probably doesn't do what they want them to do. With open source, you can make it what you want to do. It's just going to take time. So that was kind of like the biggest one. The second one was as cybersecurity started becoming kind of like a trendy topic, and everybody wanted to say like, oh yeah, like I'm aware of cybersecurity now. Well, like I've read everything about those attacks, and the decision makers would say like, no, like we need to ensure that it's safe. So that's when we would default back to the like, okay, like this is a process. We do an analysis. We do different level of analysis, and then we fix it up. No, and we can be constantly doing it. And then it was also helpful that kind of like at the same time that they were telling you that open source wasn't safe, you had incidents like WannaCry happening, no, or the ones that have just been happening with several of these big companies where suddenly like you have this fear showing an error message, and that's when you kind of like tell them, okay, like that's a licensed product, that can also not be safe, no, it can also crash. So if it happens there, it can happen here, but here you have the control, no. And that was kind of like sometimes what actually reassured people, that instead of just being a box that you cannot access or change or move anything, that it was actually something that we could actually go in and start fixing, you know, from day one. um, I think also part of this education was making people understand how actually platforms or technology fails. No, because like I remember we used to have one of the agencies that their internet provider used to fall and crash, and there was no internet, um, and they would blame us. You know, it's like the platform's not working and the servers are down. It's kind of like it's not us, it's them. No, so also like part of making like this top level management aware of like where are the responsibility points, and saying like, hey, we're responsible for this part, and that's what your technology that now you own are responsible for. But hey, they're living in a third party's data center, so if anything happens in that data center, it's their responsibility. And your internet provider is another third party that's involved in the delivery, and that's another issue. And if your computer provider updated all his computers and changed some configuration that now clashes with the configuration of our platform and didn't let us know, that's another sense of responsibility. So, so I think that's kind of like where a lot of like C levels and these ministers, and I don't blame them. They're focused on what they need to be focused, and especially their health or army or whatever. Well, that's their specialty. But so there was also like a lot of work and kind of like working this sensibilization of, not because it's very easy to say, oh, like point the finger at somebody and blame them, but just for them to understand where the actually blame was falling, and it was a very interesting process the whole way.